Chapter 1. The Coldness of Justice. Judge Helena Vasconcelos carried herself like a monument, unshakable, untouchable. She had built her entire career on control, over the courtroom, over facts, over herself. Justice was her compass, and emotion had no place on her bench. For years she had sentenced the guilty with the sharpness of a blade, but one name had never truly left her. Davi Moura. 14 years ago, she had sent him to prison for life. The case had been messy. Circumstantial evidence, one shaky witness, but in the end, she trusted the system. Trusted that the facts were enough, or so she told herself, until the envelope arrived. It had no sender. Inside, a photograph of Davi in prison, older now, eyes hollow but defiant. Beneath it, a single sentence: "You condemned an innocent man." Helena stared at it for minutes. Her pulse rose like thunder in her ears. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image haunted her. Not just Davy's face, but the memory of her own voice reading his sentence, the certainty in her tone, the cold finality. By morning, she had pulled the old case from the archive. She locked her office door and spread the files across her desk. Testimonies, evidence, photos, reports. It didn't take long to see it. Holes she hadn't noticed, or had chosen not to. A key witness had recanted weeks later, but it was buried. In an internal memo, the supposed weapon had no fingerprints. A report was missing. No one had questioned why. She felt sick. For the first time in her career, the law no longer gave her comfort. It gave her doubt. She filed an official request to visit Davy at the penitentiary. The guards looked confused. Why would a judge visit an inmate alone? But Helena didn't explain. When she entered the visitation room, her breath caught in her throat. He was sitting there. Older, yes, hardened, but still him. Davy looked up, and his eyes narrowed. Recognition. Anger, disbelief. He stood slowly. "Judge Vasconcelos, why are you here?" She sat across from him, struggling to hold his gaze. "I believe," she began, her voice trembling, "I may have made a mistake." He let out a bitter laugh. "Took you long enough." But then he looked closer. At her hands. At her face. At the weight she carried now. His expression softened just slightly. "What do you want from me?" She swallowed hard. "The truth. Everything. I'm reopening your case." There was a long silence. Then he nodded once. "Then we start. From the beginning." And just like that, the woman who had once condemned him was now his only hope for redemption. Chapter 2. Echoes from the past. Davy hadn't imagined he'd ever see her again, not the woman who read his sentence without blinking. But there she was, back in his life, like a ghost wearing perfume. Helena returned to the prison days later with a notebook in her hands and shame in her eyes. She asked for the full story, not the filtered version from court, but his, and Davi, cautious but desperate to be heard, told her. He'd been a history teacher, respected, quiet, never in trouble, until the night the district attorney's brother was found dead outside a nightclub. Davy had argued with him once in public. It was enough. The police needed someone. The DA needed revenge, and Davi fit the mold. They twisted timelines, edited footage, pressured witnesses. He didn't even get to testify properly. Everything happened too fast. When Helena listened, something cracked inside her. How many like him had she sentenced? How many truths had she missed in the name of order? She started digging. Late nights, quiet phone calls. She contacted an old journalist who remembered the case and who always believed it was rigged. Together they found hidden documents, altered testimonies, and one key witness, the nightclub bouncer who had vanished during the trial. Helena tracked him down in another state. He was afraid, said they threatened his family if he testified. But when she swore to protect him, he agreed to speak. For the first time in 14 years, a piece of light pierced through the prison walls. Davy tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. But he noticed Helena changing. She no longer wore her armor. She asked about his past, his students, his favorite books, the life they stole from him. One afternoon, their hands brushed as she passed him a file. Neither of them moved. Their eyes met. Something unspoken lingered. She pulled away first, confused, almost guilty. But Davy saw it. The walls between them weren't just legal anymore. They were personal. Later that night, she stood in her shower, water running cold, wondering how a man she once believed was a criminal could now be the only one who made her feel alive. And Davy lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, whispering her name like a prayer. Chapter 3. Hearts in suspense. Helena had never imagined herself returning to that prison so often, not as a judge, not as a woman. But something had changed the moment she looked into Davy's eyes again. The courtroom version of her, cold, efficient, absolute, no longer felt real. Now she was someone else, someone conflicted, someone breaking. Each visit started the same, with her clutching a file or a notebook to justify being there, to justify it to herself. But the truth was, her reasons were shifting. It was no longer just about justice, it was about him. At first, they spoke only of the case. Davy recounted every detail of the night that ruined his life. She took notes, asked questions, kept her tone neutral. But with every answer he gave, she saw more of the man behind the inmate number, the teacher, the son, the man who once believed in fairness before it abandoned him. He was calm, measured, never pleading. And that more than anything struck her. He didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't try to manipulate. He simply told the truth, even in parts that made him vulnerable, like the panic he felt when they arrested him, the humiliation of being paraded in handcuffs in front of former students, the isolation, the nightmares. Helena began to see the pieces of a puzzle she'd ignored for years. Pieces that painted a very different picture, and with each visit, their conversations grew longer and deeper. She started asking things that had nothing to do with legal files. What were your favorite books to teach? Did you ever think about leaving the city before everything happened? What would you do if you were free tomorrow? He answered with honesty, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with a far-off look that made her heart ache. One afternoon, as she gathered her things to leave, he said quietly, "You look different than you did 14 years ago." She froze for a moment, caught off guard. "Older?" she asked, trying to smile. "No," he said. "Softer." She walked out with that word echoing in her chest. Softer. She didn't know whether to feel complimented or exposed. That night, she stayed up late, reviewing evidence on her living room floor. But every time she tried to focus, her thoughts drifted back to him. His voice, his eyes, his steadiness. She hated that it felt good to be near him. She hated it, and she longed for it. The next day, she was called into a private meeting with the prison warden. He closed the door behind her, his expression unreadable. "Your visits are becoming too frequent, Judge Vasconcelos. Staff have noticed there are concerns." "Concerns?" she asked, already knowing where this was going. "Some believe your involvement may be inappropriate. He is still an inmate. This could damage your reputation, your career." Helena stood, heart pounding. He was wrongfully convicted. "I'm following every legal protocol." "I'm not accusing you," the warden interrupted. "I'm warning you. There are people watching now." She left the meeting with her hands clenched into fists. Not from fear, but from rage. She was tired of being judged for seeking the truth. Tired of pretending this was just another case, because it wasn't. Davy wasn't just a name in a file anymore. He was a man whose life had been stolen. And somehow, in trying to return it, she had found herself changed, and Davy, he was noticing too. He didn't speak of it directly, but it was in his eyes, in the way he sat forward when she arrived, in how his hands lingered just a second longer when she passed him a file through the small opening beneath the glass. He hadn't felt human in years, but with her, he did. He began to dream again, fantasies he wouldn't dare speak aloud, of open skies, of bookstores, of walking beside her, not across a table, not separated by glass, but truly beside her. One rainy afternoon, lightning cracked across the sky as Helena walked into the visitation room. The guards had delayed her entrance due to the storm, and now the room was empty, just the two of them. She looked tired, worn. He noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling slightly. "Someone tried to scare me off the case. Anonymous messages, a car watching my apartment. They know I'm close." Davy tensed. "They're threatening you now?" She nodded. "I didn't expect it to go this far. But someone powerful, someone connected to the original conviction. They're hiding something, and they're willing to fight dirty." "You could walk away," he said, his voice low. She looked up sharply. "No, I won't. Not now, not when I know the truth, not when I see you." She didn't realize what she'd said until it was out. He did. There was a silence, a charged stillness. Slowly, he reached up and pressed his hand to the glass. She hesitated, then mirrored him. Their palms met, separated by the transparent wall. But it felt like a touch, real, electric. "If I ever get out of here," he said softly, "I want to see you. Not like this, not in this place." Her throat tightened. "If you ever get out," she whispered, "I'll be waiting." The days that followed were a blur of intensity. Helena doubled down on the investigation, submitting formal requests, contacting legal allies she trusted. A retired forensic analyst agreed to review the crime scene again. More inconsistencies surfaced. The case was unraveling, but so was Helena's world. The Judiciary Board opened an inquiry into her conduct. She was told to step back. She refused. Davy knew what it meant. She was risking her future for him, and it scared him. Because he didn't want to be the reason she lost everything. "You shouldn't destroy your life for mine," he told her once. "You didn't destroy your life," she replied. "They did. I'm just trying to give it back." But it wasn't only about guilt or justice anymore. It was something deeper, something neither of them dared name. Still, it pulsed beneath every word, every look, every second they spent together. One evening, Helena stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she felt different. She had spent her whole life building walls. Now a man behind bars had broken through them with nothing but truth and presence. Davy, meanwhile, lay awake on the hard prison mattress, reliving every conversation, every glance. He had known loneliness like a second skin, but now he imagined a future. A dangerous, impossible, beautiful future. And the next time she came to see him, they didn't talk about the case, not right away. She told him about a childhood memory of feeding birds in her grandmother's garden. He told her about the time he got lost in a library and loved it. They laughed, quietly but sincerely, and when their hands found each other through the glass again, neither of them looked away. The world was still broken, the truth still buried. But in that small room, against all odds, something impossible had begun to bloom. But now he imagined a future. Chapter 4. When truth bleeds, the sun was barely rising when Helena received the knock on her apartment door. It wasn't violent, just 3 firm taps. But her chest tightened anyway. She opened it to find a man in a dark suit holding a small envelope, no badge, no introduction. He simply handed it to her and left. Inside was a folded page, typed, "Anonymous. You're playing a dangerous game. Back off before you lose more than your reputation." She stood still for a long time. The words didn't shake. Her hands did. This wasn't just about corruption anymore. It was personal. And someone out there, someone powerful, knew. She was getting too close to the truth. She didn't tell anyone, not even Davy, not yet. Because even with the growing danger, the fear, the tension that followed her like a shadow, she couldn't stop. Too much was at stake. The week before, an independent expert had confirmed what she already suspected, that the original forensic report used in Davy's trial had been tampered with. Key evidence had been planted, timelines manipulated, witnesses coached or coerced. It was no longer a question of if Davy was innocent, it was now a matter of proving it to the world, and time was running out. She filed a formal request to reopen the case. It would go through a review panel, one of which included judges she'd worked with for years, but she knew the moment her name appeared on that request. So would the whispers, the glances, the rumors. One evening after submitting the appeal, she sat alone in her office staring at a photograph of her graduation day. In it, she was standing beside her father, a man who had believed in the law. More than anything else, would he be proud of me now, or ashamed? The question haunted her, because the Helena she was becoming didn't follow the same rules. She was guided by something more instinctive, something raw. Truth. And Davy. Davy had learned not to hope for much. Hope, in prison, was like a bird that flew too close to the wire. It always got burned. But something in him was changing. He noticed the way the guards looked at him. Different now. Some suspicious, some curious. Whispers had started to spread. Rumors of a reinvestigation, of someone high up fighting for him. He kept to himself, as always. But when Helena came to see him that week, she wasn't smiling. She looked pale, exhausted. "What happened?" he asked immediately. She sat down across from him, her eyes heavy. "They denied the first request, claimed lack of sufficient cause. But I'm appealing, I'm not giving up." "That's not what I meant," he said softly. "You look like you haven't slept in days." She hesitated, then whispered, "They're threatening me, watching me, trying to scare me off. They want this buried." Davy clenched his fists beneath the table. "You need to stop. Helena, you can't—" "Don't tell me to stop," she snapped. Her voice cracked as she fought back tears. "I can't sleep knowing what I've done. I can't live in silence anymore. You're innocent and I put you here." He reached toward the glass with shaking hands. His voice was a whisper. "You didn't do this. The system did. But I was the system," she said, barely audible, "and I'm still part of it. But this time, I choose the truth." They sat like that, staring through the glass, the silence thick between them, not judge and inmate. Just two people caught in something bigger than either of them had expected. Something they no longer knew how to escape. Days turned into weeks. The appeal moved slowly, tangled in red tape and bureaucracy, but Helena was relentless. She showed up in courtrooms with files, affidavits, new reports. She confronted judges, prosecutors, people she once called colleagues, and looked them in the eye. She was met with coldness, resistance, and eventually, betrayal. One of her own clerks leaked internal documents. The media got hold of it. Judge, romantically involved with inmates she once sentenced. The headlines exploded. Photos of Helena entering the prison were plastered across news sites. Commentators called her biased, reckless, emotionally unstable. She was suspended from her duties. They made her the villain, and still, she didn't stop. Because something had shifted inside her. She wasn't just fighting for Davy's freedom anymore. She was fighting for herself, to reclaim who she truly was beneath the robes, to feel clean again, honest, alive. Davy found out. From a guard about the media storm. When Helena arrived the next day, she looked different. No makeup, No blazer, just a plain sweater and tired eyes. He stood when he saw her. "They suspended you." "I'm sorry." She smiled weakly. "I'm not. I expected it." She exhaled deeply. "But it means we're closer. They wouldn't attack if we weren't close." He nodded, then leaned forward. "You shouldn't come here anymore. They'll use it against you." "Let them," she said. "They already have. There's nothing left to hide." She lowered her voice. "If I lose everything, Davy, I want to know it meant something. That we meant something." His breath caught. He hadn't dared imagine she would say it out loud. "We do," he whispered. "You saved me long before you tried to free me, and that moment, stripped of titles, power walls, was the most honest they had ever been. A month later, the unexpected happened. The new appeal was accepted. Not just accepted. It was granted an emergency hearing. The court admitted new evidence that exposed the manipulated forensic report and the coerced witness statements. Davy would be granted a retrial. His sentence would be vacated pending further investigation. He wasn't free yet. But the gates were opening. Helena sat in the gallery during the hearing, unable to be part of the legal team due to her suspension. But she didn't care. When the judge read the decision aloud, her hands trembled in her lap. Not from nerves, from release. Davy turned in his seat, and their eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded. "It's not over," the look said, "but we're finally being heard." Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, microphones, flashing lights, accusations. She ignored them all, walked straight past them, into the late afternoon sun, and for the first time in years she felt clean. She still didn't know what the future held, if she'd ever return to the bench, if Davy would ever walk as a free man. But she knew this. She had found something worth losing everything for. Something, someone, real. And that truth, however painful, however complicated, was finally bleeding into the light. Chapter 5. The Cost of Redemption. Davy stood outside the prison gates for the first time in 17 years. He wasn't looking through them. He was looking beyond. The court had overturned his conviction, not with the dramatic slam of a gavel or a thunderous cheer in the courtroom. No. The moment came quietly, in a thin white envelope delivered to his lawyer's office. A line of text. "The state withdraws all charges. Case dismissed." It didn't feel real at first, even when they opened the gates, even when the guard, the same one who once called him a lost cause, handed him back his personal items, an old watch, a faded photograph of his sister, and the clothes he had worn on the day of his arrest. Everything felt too small, too far away. Freedom didn't come with fireworks, it came with silence and the cold weight of 17 years pressing on his back like a second skin. But then he saw her, Helena, standing across the road. No crowd, no cameras, just her. She didn't move, didn't run to him. She waited, and when their eyes locked, he felt it, all of it, the pain, the fight. The impossible road they had walked together. He took the first step, then another, and suddenly they were face to face. Neither of them spoke, but she reached up and touched his face gently, like she needed to make sure he was real. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in almost 2 decades, he let himself breathe. The weeks that followed were a blur. Davy struggled with the world outside, the noise, the speed, the choices. Every step felt uncertain. He didn't know how to use a smartphone, didn't recognize the music on the radio. Even crossing the street felt like learning to walk again, but Helena was there, not just as his guide, but as his anchor. They spent hours talking, mostly at night when the world was quieter and the past didn't scream so loudly. She told him everything. About the day she found the first inconsistency, the guilt, the fear, the hate she felt for herself. "I didn't sleep for weeks," she said one night, curled beside him on the couch. I kept seeing your face every time I closed my eyes. But you didn't even know me then, he whispered. She turned to him. I knew enough. I knew what they said about you didn't match the man I saw in court. But I ignored it. I let the system win. He took her hand. You didn't let it win. You fought. And you gave me back my life. She shook her head, her eyes wet. You gave me back mine. Public opinion was slow to change. There were still articles calling it a scandal, some claiming she had only fought for Davy because of emotional entanglement. She lost her position as a judge permanently, but she didn't care. She didn't want the robe anymore. She wanted truth. And she had already found it. Together they started something new, a foundation created for people like Davy. Wrongfully convicted men and women with no voice, no advocate, no chance. They called it the Second Light. Davy visited prisons, talked to inmates who reminded him of himself. Lost, angry, hardened, but not hopeless. Helena gave lectures, not to defend her past, but to expose the system that let it happen, and slowly the world began to listen. One evening they stood on a rooftop watching the city lights below. Helena wore her hair loose. Davy, now used to his new world, held 2 cups of coffee. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The court, the gavel. He smiled. You mean, do I miss seeing you in that robe, ordering people around? She laughed. He loved that sound. It still felt like a miracle every time he heard it. I miss the idea of justice, she admitted. But not the illusion we were taught to protect. What we do now is justice, he said quietly. She nodded. Real justice is messy, imperfect. It bleeds, but it saves. He looked at her. So strong, so broken, so whole. You saved me, he said again. She turned to him, her expression soft. No, we saved each other. He leaned in, and under the stars, with nothing left to prove, and everything still to heal. They kissed, not as judge and inmate, not as symbols of a broken system, but as 2 people who lost everything and found love in the ruins. They would carry scars forever. Not all wounds fade, but in the end, it wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing what came next. And they chose each other every day, every step, because sometimes the greatest redemption story is love.